Have you ever felt that moment when you wanted to rush and take a pen and write down a few lines? Have you looked out of a window and seen a glorious morning, a glorious sunset or a sunrise, and wanted to take a pen and brush and paint it? Have you wanted to do some woodwork, make a little woodpecker or a little sparrow? Has such a moment occurred to you? So, this is called inspiration. And inspiration is simply the process where a person is mentally stimulated to do something creative. So, today if we will deal with the poem Poetry by Pablo Neruda. So, in this poem, the poet deals with that moment of inspiration when he felt like becoming a poet, when he wanted to start writing poetry. So, let's see. And it was at that age poetry arrived. In search of me, I don't know. I don't know where it came from winter or a river. I don't know how or when. No, they were not voices, they were not words, nor silence, but from a street I was summoned, from the branches of night, abruptly from the others, among violent fires. So here we see that the poet is trying to tell us when poetry came to him. He starts the poem with the word and it was at that age. Usually we use the word and when you are continuing a story. So here the poet gives us a feeling of continuation. He's been having a conversation with his viewers or his readers, and he is continuing that conversation. So like a child would say and that toy or and that person, he starts with and. It is a continuation. He says poetry arrived. Here we have to notice something that is very unique. He does not say that he went in search of inspiration. Instead, poetry has come in search of him. Poetry has arrived. He doesn't know from where poetry came. How did it come? He says that did it come from the winter or a river? Here the word winter can mean something that is frozen. Winter usually denotes a decay, frozen, where all the elements are at their lower point. It is stagnation. It is an ice-filled world or cold where people are inside. So it could mean the sad part of life, sad, melancholy thoughts. Did his inspiration come from there? He wonders. Whereas we see river can be taken as life, which is flowing continuously, which is bubbling with energy. River is something beautiful, something filled with life. So did it come from happy thoughts? Could it be from the thoughts of ecstasy and excitement that inspiration has come? The poet doesn't know. He says it could be. Is it from the winter? Is it from the river? I don't know how or when. It was not voices. It was not a voice telling him you have to write. Neither was it a silence. Here we see the poet is unable to explain how it came. Nor was it words, but from a street I was summoned. So here we see that the poet, he may be walking on a street, he is amidst other people, but he alone was summoned. He was summoned to he was summoned from the branches of night, abruptly amidst from the other people whom he was standing with. He was called out alone among violent fires. So violent fires here could stand for the violent chaos of life. Life is at a fast pace. There are so many responsibilities, so many things going on at the same time. Personal life, public life, there is a political life, and a person has responsibilities on every level. So there could be fires of passion, of chaos. And amidst it all, let us see what has touched our poet. It is poetry has touched him, has summoned him. Of returning alone, there I was without a face. and it touched me. I did not know what to say. My mouth had no way. With the names, my eyes were blind. And something started in my soul. Fever or forgotten wings. He cannot explain what it was, but he knew that he was returning alone towards it. He was without a face, and it touched him. He doesn't know what to say. My mouth had no way of saying names. His eyes were blind, but something started in his soul. Something suddenly sprang up in his soul. Was it a fever or forgotten wings? So, on one side, we see the word fever, feverish, anguished thoughts, or forgotten wings, the wings of his childhood, something that would help him to soar high up into the sky. So when we see the word, I was without a face, what does it tell us? It is the poet feels that he is without an identity. So it brings to our mind so many pictures. It brings to our mind a soldier who is called up by the royal king or queen to step forward and to be knighted, to be honored, or an athlete or any such person who is, or a soldier who is called forth and a badge of honor is put on his neck. He is knighted or he is given any sort of honor, or homage is paid to him, and suddenly he has a face in the public eye, and in his own face he gets an identity. So the faceless, nameless poet is suddenly transformed to something. And who is the queen here? The queen who is conferring that knighthood is the muse, poetry. And I made my own way deciphering that fire, and I wrote the first faint line. Faint without substance, pure nonsense, pure wisdom of someone who knows nothing. And suddenly I saw the heavens. So here we see the poet is starting on his career. He is writing the first line. He says it is pure nonsense that he is writing. But at the same time, it is pure wisdom also, because he has been touched by the inspiration of his muse, poetry. He is somebody who knows nothing, and yet at the same time, we see that he has seen everything. He saw the heavens. In his inspiration, he sees the heavens. I made my own way deciphering that fire. He says the words decipher that fire. So basically, poetry has given him a message. It is sort of like a secret code, isn't it? A secret code is what we say deciphered. So, deciphered, which means, that is when a code is given, the person knows how to understand that secret language. He is decoding it. So he is able to decode the message that poetry gives him. What does this make us feel? That all the messages that are going to be given towards the poet from his muse in the future, he will be able to read because he has already decoded that language. It's going to be a lifelong romance between the poet and poetry. And suddenly he sees the heavens, unfasten and open, planets, palpitating plantations, shadow perforated, riddled with arrows, fire and flowers, the winding night, the universe and the universe. So it is unfastened. The doors of heaven are suddenly open. The poet has entered the heavens. There are planets, there are palpitating plantations. What does palpitating plantations indicate? It could be plantations that remained barren until then. The plantations in his heart, just like the plantations of New America that he is seeing, those plantations that lay barren are suddenly filled with plants throbbing with life. There are planets, the very universe is around him. He sees the shadow is perforated. There are little holes in it. And what does he see? There are arrows, there is fire, and there are flowers. The fire could be again the the burning fire through which this phoenix is rising up. The poet is shedding his old self and rising into the new. The arrows, we can take many meanings for the arrows. The arrow is those particular topics in which the author is wanting to write. The arrow can also be the judgment of critics who are going to be the first readers of his poetry. The flowers we can take are the beauty which he brings forth in his poetry. The flowers can also be the adoration of his readers whom he inspires and touches with his poetry. I, infinitesimal being, drunk with a great starry void. Starry void. Likeness, image of mystery, fell myself a pure part of the abyss. So the poet is drunk with joy. He is drunk with that inspiration. And what does he say? He says, I am an infinitesimal being. I am just a speck in this great universe. But I, for that moment, felt myself a part of that great abyss, that great universe, the great creation. In my inspiration, I too became a part of it. So here we see that the poem is dealing mainly with inspiration. It is a free verse, it is a modern poetry, and one of the major devices used here is definitely imagery. A lot of imagery is presented with the starry nights, the plantations, the planets revolving, then the branches, the night with branches, the fire, the arrows, the flowers that are coming in. Then we have the notion of binary opposites by saying palpitating plantations on one side and the other side is open planets, perforated shadows. So you see that opposite, usage of opposite, flowers and arrows. Then, it is the starry nights. At the same time, the blinding morning. So he was in a street, and he says that he's called away abruptly from others. The poet is amidst others. At the same time, he is presented as naked and alone, without an identity, without a name, which poetry is conferring on him. So here we see the beauty of inspiration. We see so many poets have written about inspiration, about how they began to write poetry. Some have gone seeking poetry, some have had poetry seeking them. So if we take Keats, John Keats says that I rise on the viewless wings of poetry. Just like Neruda is saying, is it forgotten wings? Keats has long ago said that I rise on the viewless wings of poetry. In his Ode to Nightingale, Keats says the song, that self-same song that was heard in olden times by kings and clowns alike. So that voice of inspiration has been traveling through the ages. In Kubla Khan, Coleridge says, I with my inspiration will build a dome that is greater than which Kubla Khan, the great king, has built. William Wordsworth says that poetry is that powerful, spontaneous flow of words recollected in tranquility. So all these poets tell us that poetry comes to them and knocks at their door, and they, with using beauty of phrase and diction, show to us that very lofty thoughts which all of us have imagined, but they are putting it in the language that is universal, that speaks for everyone who is enjoying this beauty. We see that even as a sculpture or any painter that you look, we see that Raphael's painting of Madonna makes people want to worship it. Or a Michelangelo would see a David inside a block of stone, and he would release that statue from the block of stone. So inspiration is something that all of us have. It is a calling for each and every one. We must take care to listen to the words of inspiration. All young readers, There is the voice of inspiration that is knocking at your door, calling you out to do creative things, and every one of us has the ability. So here, Pablo Neruda is giving us that message also. No, not only is he telling us how he came towards poetry, he is also inspiring the readers to answer to their calling in life. So Pablo Neruda is a very famous poet from Chile, Southern America. He is a great statesman. He was a politician who was very much connected to the communist cause. He has written a great many poems. He won the Nobel Prize for Literature in 1971. His most famous poets are his 20 love sonnets, which have been translated into so many languages all over the world. He is very much known mostly for his romanticism, his sensual, romantic, mystic poetry. There is surrealism also in his poetry. Some of his poetry has dealt with political manifestos also. Thank you. Poetry by Pablo Neruda. And it was at that age poetry arrived in search of me. I don't know where it came from winter or a river. I don't know how or when. No, they were not voices, they were not words nor silence, but from a street. It called me from the branches of night, abruptly from the others, among raging fires, or returning alone. There it was, without a face, and it touched me. I didn't know what to say. My mouth had no way with names. My eyes were blind. Something knocked in my soul. Fever of forgotten wings. And I made my own way, deciphering that fire. And I wrote the first faint line. Faint, without substance, pure nonsense, pure wisdom of someone who knows nothing. And suddenly I saw the heavens unfastened and open, planets, palpitating plantations, the darkness riddled, perforated with arrows, fire, and flowers, the overpowering night, the universe. And I, tiny being, drunk with the great starry void, likeness, image of mystery, felt myself a pure part of the abyss. I wheeled with the stars, my heart broke loose with the wind. Poetry